And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook to take us here and through the end of the week. Starting with this Wednesday, we have an area of low pressure that's just east of Kodiak Island, bringing wintry weather, accumulating snows, especially the coastal mountains of the eastern Kenai and around Prince William Sound. By Thursday morning, this low will continue to just gradually drift northeastward and weaken. Remnant trough frontal system still keeping some IFR conditions along the northwestern Gulf Coast. Also IFR conditions out across the eastern Aleutians back toward the central Bering Sea. Much of the mainland interior seeing VFR conditions. By Thursday afternoon, we still have areas of IFR located especially around Prince William Sound. Areas of the Panhandle, some MVFR conditions, as well as out here the middle Yukon Valley and along the North Slope, Arctic coast, and then extending out in there of the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. By Friday morning, a little area of IFR anticipated on the east side of Kodiak Island into the southwestern Gulf, as well as north of the western Aleutians up through the lower Bering Sea. A broad area of MVFR over the Gulf extending into the Panhandle, as well as up along Kotzebue Sound and running along the Arctic coast. For Friday afternoon, an area of IFR conditions will be out over the southwestern Gulf as a weak area of low pressures along a trough or frontal system. We've had this extended stretch of low pressure systems from the lower Gulf, North Pacific back across the lower Bering, and an area of IFR anticipated there just north of the central Aleutians for Friday afternoon. Looking at past conditions, though, on Thursday across the central eastern Brooks Range, Anatuvik, as well as Adigan Pass should see VFR conditions, though as you fly farther north up into the North Slope, you may encounter MVFR. Further south and west, down along the west arm of the Alaska Range, MVFR conditions at Lake Clark and Merrill, as well as rainy passes. But then as we round out through the central Alaska Range eastward toward the Alcan border, we expect VFR conditions at Windy Pass, Isabel Pass, and Mentasta Passes. Further south and west, Tanita Pass should be on that fringe between VFR to the north and MVFR. And as you go further south, conditions will be poor along Prince William Sound. IFR conditions. Portage Pass may initially start out MVFR, but by midday we anticipate IFR conditions along the eastern half of the pass and especially out over Prince William Sound. And then finally across the north end of the Panhandle, up there at Chilkoot and White Passes, MVFR conditions expected Thursday. Looking at the freezing levels, the surface freezing line will run along the Kamchatka coastline, then out over the northern Bering through St. Matthew and down along Nunavik Island, dipping a bit into the Alaska Peninsula and then running up along the east side of the Seward Peninsula, along the northeastern Gulf Coast into the inner channels there of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft, there is one little pocket of right around and just above 2,000 feet in northwest Canada, as well as out over the eastern Gulf down into the southwestern areas of the Panhandle and Haida Gwaii, and then another little area where freezing levels bump up to 6,000 feet in the North Pacific, south of the Alaska Peninsula. The greatest potential for some moderate icing on Thursday will be over areas of the inner channels and intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle, perhaps areas of Prince William Sound above 3,000 feet, as well as up into the central Yukon Valley, a little pocket of above 3,000 foot icing, and then an area along this trough where low pressure is just kind of residing that extends out here into the North Pacific. We find an area above 3,000 feet for the potential moderate icing between the Pribilovs and the eastern Aleutians out over the lower parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream level winds at 30,000 feet. The most notable feature is this core of winds in excess of 100 knots, upwards around 120, 125 knot jet core south of the Aleutian chain and south of the Gulf of Alaska in the North Pacific. Come down to 700 millibars, 9,000 feet. We continue to see that core of strong winds in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, anywhere from 50 to upwards of 75 knots in the North Pacific, south of the Aleutians and south of the Gulf of Alaska. Within the Gulf, we find south winds coming inland near Prince William Sound, Cape Suckling, on up into the eastern Alaska range, 40, 50 knot southerly winds that extend up then along the Alcan border all the way up toward Kaktovik. And at 3,000 feet, The core of winds remain along and south of the Aleutians, 50 to 60 knot winds, and then just from the lower Gulf of Alaska, we have 50 plus knot winds that extend especially down in a broad belt across the North Pacific. And this will translate to the potential for considerable moderate turbulence areas of the Panhandle, and especially along the northeastern, northwestern Gulf Coast back into Prince William Sound, surface to 6,000 feet. And then looking back out as we get out toward the end there of the Alaska Peninsula, including the Pribilof Islands and then much of the Aleutian chain, we expect some moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet.